welcome once again. I know 2 videos in 1 week with this Cook With Me series that, yeah, it's beyond belief, isn't it? I am going to make something that's a little bit, takes a little more time than the easy chicken taco one. This one is the shepherd pie. And it does take a lot of prep, so usually I try to get all my ingredients put together so I'm not digging for them when it's time to put them in the pot of whatever pot it needs to be in. So it's going to take a little bit more time, and you can fudge a little bit by using ready-made ingredients. This called for fresh thyme and rosemary, and you cut them up real fine. Boy, it does make your hands smell really good though. You could use dried. Remember, if you use dried, it does call for a different measurement. It's like half the amount of fresh. Mashed potatoes are usually on top. I am going to cheat and use ready-made mashed potatoes. They're not instant. That I won't use. But they are already made, and they're in the refrigerator section in your grocery store. And because my husband doesn't have carbs, I'm going to put half with the mashed potatoes and half with mashed cauliflower. We've had it before. It is yummy. This whole recipe is very yummy because of all of the different seasonings and things that you add to it, that it's not bland at all. I was very pleasantly surprised. So we're going to get started by cooking our meat. Now the recipe, I kind of changed it up a little bit. It had called for lamb, ground lamb, and I'm not a lamb fan. I'd rather just have the regular beef, which a lot of shepherd's pie are made out of. So that is what we're going to go with. So a few other things that you will need, and of course I will put this in the description as well. As I mentioned, the mashed potatoes, and I'm going to use mashed cauliflower as well. You need onion, you need some carrots, garlic, the meat, salt, pepper, a little bit of flour, some tomato paste. They called for chicken broth, and I don't know if it's because they were using the lamb, but I'm going to use beef broth, Worcestershire sauce, the rosemary and the thyme, and then you can choose if you want to add corn or peas or both. It called for both. It's only half a cup of each. I'll probably put less than that for the corn because it is a carb, so I don't want to have, he'll eat just a tiny bit of carbs, but I don't really want to have a lot of those. And then the peas are always good too, and those can be fresh or frozen because frozen keeps better. That's what I have. And you don't have to thaw them because they're, after you make all this stuff and you put it in the pan to cook, it's going to go in the oven. So yeah, there's going to be a lot going on here. So let's get our oven going, and we're going to, because we want to have that ready once this is ready, we're going to go ahead and put our meat in. This recipe called for 1.5 pounds of meat, and the oil was probably because of the lamb. It might have stuck to the pan a little more. That's why I didn't put a lot of oil in there. So we are just going to cook this, and I am going to also be throwing in some onions and some carrots. Now you could cook the onions and carrots first if you want, and then add the ground beef, which I think is what the directions say, but I'm just going to go ahead and plop this in here too. Turn my oven up a little bit. So with that, I will come back after this cooks down a little bit, and I've got the onion and the carrot cooked as well. Okay, we're pretty well cooked for all of the meat, and then I've got the carrots and the onions in there as well. And it has you adding the garlic, and of course I'm doing the cheater's method for the garlic and adding stuff that's already been minced, because this already calls for enough steps that it's like I can mince the garlic. I have the tools to do it, but this is just so much easier. So once you add that, Then we're just going to let it cook a little bit. Okay, the next step is going to be to add the flour. We've got 2 tablespoons of flour. That's going to help thicken this whole thing up once you add some more liquid to it and as it cooks in the oven as well. So I've got my flour. We're just going to add some of that. Stir it so it gets it coated evenly as much as possible. It may look a little gummy on the meat, but that's the way it's going to look until you add more liquid. All right. That cooks. Get all the stuff off. Keep an eye on it so it doesn't burn. You only needed to let it cook for about a minute once you add the flour, and then we're going to start adding some of our other seasonings and liquid. So let's go ahead and start by adding the liquid. That will help keep it from burning and sticking to the bottom. A little bit of Worcestershire sauce. And I'm going to add just a little bit more because this Worcestershire really gives it a nice flavor. We're also going to add in our rosemary and thyme and some tomato paste as well. Just like any recipe, you can always adjust what you want. Sorry about that. What you want to add, what you don't want to add, how much you want to add. Like the Worcestershire, I added a little bit more. If you wanted to add a little bit more tomato paste to make it a little bit more tomatoey. There's a great word, isn't there? You can do that. If you don't want to add as much onions, because there's a whole cup of onions in here, but as you can see, it's not super noticeable. There's only 2 carrots. I get those in the bulk section, so I only have to buy 2. Why buy a bunch when you're not going to use them? But yeah, you can adjust your recipe. Now, the flour, I don't know if I would really adjust that too much because you want a certain amount of thickener added to your mixture. If you're only, you would adjust how much you add if you're making a smaller batch, obviously. Make your proportions correct. But other than that, you can kind of tinker around with it to add what you want. Okay, we're going to turn this down a bit now that it's boiling and simmering. And we're going to now cook this for about 10 minutes to kind of let it thicken up. I mean, it's not super thick. You can see it's not really runny. It's a little bit. Once you push it back, you can kind of see it folds down a little bit. But this will just help once you put it in the pan with the potatoes not to want to leak as badly, get it nice and thick. So we will come back to you after our 10 minutes. Alrighty, we've got it cooked down. Now, keep in mind, it says 10 to 12 minutes or until it is thickened. So as you can see, it is not running down anymore as I push it aside. No liquid's coming down. And for me, it has been 10 minutes, but you know what? It may be less for you. So keep an eye on it. You do have to keep stirring it or it does start to stick to the bottom. Okay, so now we're going to add our other things. Remember, it was a half a cup of each, and I'm going to do peas normal, but I'm going to put less corn in it. So probably about a quarter cup, or more. They kind of like to stick. Okay, so it's not a lot, as you can see. So So we're going to stir that up. You don't have to cook this. I've already turned my stove top off, by the way. You don't have to cook this until they are thawed or cooked through. You just need to get it all incorporated. The nice thing about having that 10 minutes to let it cook and simmer down and thicken and all that is that it helps those flavors to marry together really nicely. My husband loves this recipe, so you know, if you've got a guy who likes it, you're probably gonna be doing something right. All right, so there's that. Now, as I mentioned, I used mashed potatoes that are already made, that are in the store. Now, you do have to cook this a little bit in the microwave, not the full time, but you do have to do some because otherwise it's kind of a hard, it's not all creamy and soft like this. You have to stir it up, and that's why if you cook it a little bit, it helps to soften that and be able to stir it. But they look like real potatoes because they are real potatoes. Now, as for the cauliflower, I've gotten this. Now this particular one has the bacon and cheese in it. The only reason I got that is because they didn't have the plain ones. Some stores do, some don't. So this I also cook for part of the time because I need to get that nice and soft and unfrozen, for one thing. But then as I did this, I forgot one other step I have to do, because if you've ever used these kinds of things, the mashed cauliflower, they are kind of runny. So I am straining it. So I'm getting some of that liquid off because I don't want it all runny when I put it in there in the pan. So we're getting some of that liquid off in order to make it so that it doesn't do that. All right. Our next step is to start putting it in its pan that is going to go into the oven. So we will turn you just a hair this way, not much. And you don't have to put any kind of thing on the bottom of this to keep it from sticking. You're just putting the mixture in, straight in. And a plain white casserole type of pan is fine, or you can use these, you know, the clear glass ones, you know, like the Pyrex ones. You can use those, or you can use something like this. Anything that's about the right size will work. You might have to use a metal one. Metal one's fine too. Okay. Spread that all out nicely. And because the potatoes are going to be a little bit thicker in consistency, I'm going to put them down first so that they don't, you know, kind of seep over into the other half. And you can identify this, you know, which side is which any way you want. With mine, because I've got the bacon bits in there, I'm going to know which side is the cauliflower and which side is the potatoes. One of the things they do mention is making sure these potatoes, cauliflower, etc., goes all the way to the edge to help seal it. Otherwise, if you've baked pies or anything, the juices are going to want to come up through any opening that they can find. So whether that's an edge or a slit that you've made in the pie crust, you want to make sure that that's all sealed nicely. So that's probably good enough. I don't need to use all these potatoes. Also remember that if you are going to make the potatoes from scratch, you are going to have time to do that as part of this recipe. All right. Another spoon. And we're going to go ahead and go with this now. I have a strainer and cheesecloth as well, because otherwise the cauliflower would have gone right through the strainer. I needed something with a little bit more smaller holes, etc., to be able to catch the cauliflower from doing that. Okay, we are just about ready. And if you remember when I started all this, I had preheated my oven to 400, so it is all ready to have this go in it. So now I will put it in the oven and it will cook for 25 minutes, I believe. And then afterwards it needs to set for like 15 minutes. So it kind of settles down, the juices all stop percolating in there. And if you've done anything like this before, you know it is hot, hot, hot inside of there. So if you don't let it set for that 15 minutes, when you go to try to eat it, you're probably gonna burn your mouth. So let me pop that in the oven and then we will see you back when it's done. Okay, I want to give you a little bonus idea to use. I did not come up with this on my own. This is something I had seen, and so I went ahead and decided to, I've done this before and it works great. So whenever you buy tomato paste, usually you're only using a little bit. A lot of recipes only call for like a couple of teaspoons, like our recipe did, or a tablespoon, maybe 2 tablespoons. And you end up wasting the rest of the can. I mean, as you can see, I didn't use very much. So how do you go about not wasting this and have it for later? Well, you can freeze pre-portioned amounts. So typically a tablespoon is a good amount to pre-portion because you might use 1, you might use 2. We only needed 2 teaspoons. So you could always cut a little bit off or just put the whole 3 teaspoons worth in there. I'm not going to do like super fantastic measuring. I'm just going to do approximate. And you need freezer paper that you're going to put your blob of tomato paste on. And then you'll just fold it up. Remember, it's got to be freezer paper and not something else, or you won't have that waxy side to keep it from sticking. And so there is 1 portion, and I'm just going to do a bunch of those and then put them probably in a bag or something just to keep them from being knocked all over the freezer. I'm just going to keep doing that until I have either used all of the can or pretty much most of the can, depending on how much I've got left in here. But that keeps it from being wasted, because it's always so frustrating when you use so little and it's like, well, I don't really want to throw all this away, but you can't save it in the can. It will start to get moldy, so don't do that. But this is a good alternative to that. But pretty easy. Pretty easy. And as you can see, I'm probably going to get about 4 tablespoons worth out of this. And it's pretty close to empty. I don't know how well, you probably can't see in there very well. But there might be, if I really scrape, I might be able to get another tablespoon out of there. Get some of that off my hand. All right, let's see what we can get out of here. Yeah, pretty close to another tablespoon there. Okay, now it is really empty. All right. So out of what I had in that can, I have got 5 more uses for recipes in the future. So there you go for your bonus. Okay, here it is. So as you can see, it did come up and seep a little bit of the juices around the edge, but because we had sealed it pretty well, it's not too messy. Looking good. We're going to dig into it. This is the mashed potato side. So we're going to go ahead and take some out. That look yummy. Let you see. It's nice and thick. It's not runny. Now, depending on how many potatoes you put on there, you may want to not have as much potatoes and kind of dig more of the meat out. But yum, 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 people. So I hope you enjoyed that and that you will give this a try. It is really, really tasty. All right, we'll see you next time.